Welcome back to another Learn PowerShell video. This is the second video of our 4 beginner series. Here we're going to cover some generic basics that'll get you over that initial roadblock of opening the shell and not knowing what to do before you lose yourself in the endless blank void that you see in front of you. Let's just jump right in. We're going to cover some verb and noun relationship, which is the naming schema for all PowerShell commandlets, and they're commandlets, not commands. So in PowerShell, every verb, noun entry is a commandlet, which is different from other command shell environments. So commandlets are instances of .NET classes and are not standalone executables. And you can read more about commandlets on the Microsoft Docs website if you want. I'll link that in the description, but it's not at all necessary to further your ability to script in PowerShell. So back to the verb-noun relationship, this naming schema is the least cognitive distance for you to be able to decipher exactly or very closely approximate what is going on. Something like get service, stop service, start service. You probably can figure out pretty quickly what they're doing just by the name. So get service gets me a list of all the services on my computer. If I wanted to start or stop a service, it's the same thing. And then whatever the service name is, so can so this isn't going to get open on my computer, but that would be the command that you would run. So there's also simple ones like new item or remove item, get item. All commandlets have a dash between the verb and noun, so just always make sure that you include that dash, because if you don't, you're going to get an error because it's not going to know what to do. If I tried to do just get service with space or get service no space, I'm going to get an error each time. If I have a space between the dash and the words, also going to get the same error. So just make sure that you have the get dash, or sorry, the verb dash noun, so that you're telling PowerShell you're using commandlet. You can run something as simple as get verb to find all the verbs that are approved in PowerShell. And I say approved because you can make your own verbs. However, this list of approved verbs usually has a description that goes with it that tells you when you should use that verb. This doesn't cover every possible verb scenario, but it covers a lot of them, and you can usually use these things pretty flexibly. Further expanding on that, you can use get command to find all the commands that you have on your machine. So this would be through installed modules, loaded functions, or the native PowerShell commandlets. This, as you guys can see, has a ton of commandlets available to you. And if you wanted to learn about any of them, then you can just do get help, whatever the commandlet name is, like let's do write warning because it's the last one right here. And it'll dump out this little help file for you. If you remember from the last video, you can do online, and that'll open up a web page for you to go to read the online article. Further expanding on the verbs is the nouns. So if you don't know the verb that you're looking for, but you might know the noun, let's say I knew the noun was item, you can do get command, and then in place of the verb, you would use an asterisk or star with the dash, and then you would type the noun. So let's just say item. And here's all the commandlets that have the noun item. And you can also wildcard the noun as well. So if I just knew that the noun started with an I, you can wildcard that as well with the asterisk and just kind of see everything that has the noun that starts with an I. A lot of modules have predefined prefixes for their nouns. So if you are a Windows administrator using this for something like Active Directory, you will notice that all Active Directory commands are prefixed with AD for the noun. So you can use asterisk AD, and you'll see here that almost all these commandlets are in the Active Directory module, and are prefixed with this AD. Now, if you recall from the introduction video, I mentioned that PowerShell is an object-oriented language. So everything that you're dealing with is going to be an object of some type. And you have to figure out kind of how to work with those, what type does what types have what limitations, and how just different objects interact with one another. So let's kind of just jump right in with some very basic common ones that if you've ever worked with any other scripting language that you might be aware of, or that you're probably going to be using on a daily basis, especially if you are a Windows administrator of some type, or are just an IT professional. You're going to come across these objects at one time or another. So the first most common is an array. And an array is just a list of objects or items, a grouping of them. So every array in PowerShell, if it's created by you, then you will see that to define an array, you need the @ symbol with the parentheses. So this is an array of of objects. So I can make it as simple as 5 numbers. I can make it an array of other objects, which we'll see in another video. I can make it an array of text. And you'll notice that I used single and double quotes to just to show you that it doesn't matter. So if I try to do the array, you'll see that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or if I do array of text, you'll see that it output this is a text array normally, so the quotes don't matter. You will have to learn the difference between double and single quotes, but we can cover that in another video when we're actually doing something that's going to require us to learn that. Otherwise, it's probably going to fall on deaf ears. So if I needed to find out what type of object these were, I can just do array.getType and close the parentheses, and it will tell me that it is an array, an object. So I can clearly see that it is type of system array. It's an object. I know I expected that. But if I didn't know what the object I was dealing with was, I can do getType and quickly see what type of object I'm dealing with. There is another type of collection that you can use, and it's a hash table. So that is with these squiggly brackets. So the squiggly brackets hash table differs quite a bit from an array. It processes faster, especially on very large sets of items, and it is not ordered. Whereas my array is always going to return everything in the exact order that it was cataloged. A hash table is not going to do that. So in this hash table, just so I can make this a little easy to see, you have a key and a value. So for every key, you have a value. So let's just say, and the next key value could be so and for these key and value pairs, every key has to be unique. So while you'll see that name is not unique as far as counting in the header, if I try to add name again, it will tell me the name is not unique. So and in VS Code, you can just hover over it and it'll tell you the error. But I can try to run it anyway, and PowerShell will tell me that duplicate keys, whereas name is the key I'm trying to use, is not allowed in hash tables, hash literals. So every key has to be unique. The value does not have to be unique. So if I did something like this, and then ran the hash table, you can see that I can have duplicate values, but I cannot have duplicate keys. So that is how these are referred to. For arrays, because everything is cataloged in order, you can access the items in that object sequentially. So, and you guys probably remember from the first video, all numbering in scripting languages starts at 0. So to access the first item in the array, which is number 1, I can just put the square brackets and call that by calling the first item, which is 0, in the array to get number 1. For a hash table, it's not quite the same. So for a hash table to access anything inside of it, I can do .keys to figure out what keys I have available, and I can do something similar, and I can find the value associated with the key. But I cannot do them in any set order because a hash table is not an ordered object list, so there's nothing for it to output. So these are two of the most common types of objects that you're going to see in PowerShell. Obviously, just like every other scripting language, you have things like integers by themselves. So if I do array 0.getType, you'll see that that number 1 by itself is an integer. It's an int32. If I do array of text 0.getType, you will see that this is a string. And these are what we expect. So we know that something in quotations is a string. We know that a number by itself is an integer. If I was to put these numbers in quotations, it would be a string, but because I didn't, PowerShell automatically knows this is a number, not I'm not writing 1 in a sentence. So it knows to interpret that as an integer rather than a string. So you have integers, you have arrays, you have strings, you have hash tables. You can also make a custom object. So if you remember from the first video, these snippets, you can just hit tab, and you'll see that it actually shows something similar to a hash table where it has a key value pair. It's usually using the curly brackets, but it is defined right here. This is called typecasting as a PS custom object. So let me just run this. Whoops, should have been in quotations. So you'll see that it dumps it out like that. However, if I save this to a variable, just so you guys can see the type, no, that's fine. I'll leave the typo, not a big deal. You can see that it actually says this is a custom object. So it doesn't quite behave the same way as a hash table. Some of the mannerisms are the same. Again, this is not an ordered list of objects, just like a hash table. However, there are some differences between the way these behave, which I'm sure we will cover at a later time when it will make more sense. While we're just learning the object types, there's not really a reason to go deep into when I would use this over this. So we have arrays, we have hash tables, we have custom objects, we have integers, we have strings, and many, many, many other data types. So something like, again, calling back to the Active Directory example, the Active Directory objects have very strict object types. Because I do not have a dummy Active Directory setup, I can't show you, but you would get an 80 user object back, and it acts very strict to the 80 user object guidelines. So just know that you should always check if you're not sure what type of object you're dealing with and figure out then how to manipulate or interact with that object. So one way we can get an array is, let's just save my C drive, the program files users, as an array. So let's just call it directory, and no need to recursively run it. But you see, this is a standard C drive directory, nothing special here. But if I do directory.getType, you'll see that it's an array of objects. So it's ordered. We know it's an ordered list. The order of this list is not going to change. I can add things to the end of it, but I cannot add things to the beginning. 0 is always 0, 1 is always 1, and so forth down the list until you get to the very end, which you can find with -1, the very last item. And so I can add to this list, but I cannot take away. I cannot change the order. An array is a catalog of items. I can make a new array, but again, you're getting really convoluted, and you're probably not doing it the right way if you have to recreate an array from scratch just to manipulate, some of the items therein. So you can do get type to find out what type of object you're working with. If you wanted to see something like what can you do with the object, then you want to do array, and you want to use this pipeline. Briefly talked about that in the introduction video. Again, it's taking something on the left and doing something with it on the right side of the pipeline. So we're going to run a commandlet called getMember. This allows us to see all the members that are attached to the object. So where these names are the members, and here's the member type, and then here's the definition of that member. So what it expects, and then what we can do to it. So for these, you really can't do anything to them because this is just a set array. We can add to them, we can subtract, do some simple math on these, but because they're all integers, we can only do math-based functions to these integers. On this directory, though, we might have a little more luck with some manipulation. So this is what I wanted to show you, is that in these curly brackets, you get verbs that you can use on this attribute or on this property. So the extension of, the Windows folder, we can get that. This last access time, we can actually set that. So we can change the last access time. The last write time, we can change these things. We don't only have the option to find it out, we can also modify it. So this is true for other things, but depending on what you're doing, you might be trying to manipulate an Active Directory object and you're not sure if you can make that change. Something like the name on an account, you can change the display name, but you can't change the name, which requires a different command. So you would learn that all by doing this getMember to find out how you could interact with the object. So back up to this math. So we can say array 0 equals and when I redo the array, you'll see that because I added 1 to 2, which we know are the first two numbers of the array together, and redid this, then now 1 becomes 3. 1 plus 2 equals 3. So you can do this, but what this does is recreates the entire array. So it reran it. For a small set of numbers where we only have 5 numbers, this is instantaneous. For an array that deals with thousands of objects, this is going to make you hate your life. So just make sure that you're using the right object type, and we will cover them in later videos on when you should use different object types, especially when you're creating them yourself. As we talk about the coding questions and really find out how and why to when to use these things to make sure that we're always doing the correct thing, or at least on the right track to what we are trying to accomplish. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this video here. Remember, we've covered the verb-noun relationship, what a commandlet is, how to find a verb, how to find a noun, how to find all of the commands, and then some object types. We covered arrays, different types of arrays. We've covered hash tables, PS custom objects, integers, string, and then how to find what type of object we're dealing with and how to make changes to things in that object if you can at all using get member, and briefly looked at the pipeline. Again, these are all things that we're going to expand on as we develop in this series. So thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.